I've found with writing that I don't often know what I'm getting to, and it's the process that helps me get there. And I think for art, I felt so much pressure to know from the beginning what I was doing and feeling like the intentionality was there from the beginning rather than letting the process dictate that and drive it and build upon itself. And I think like any practice, art is, for me, it's like working out where if you do it sporadically, it kind of sucks every time a little bit. If you're doing it consistently and you're in that flow and in your groove, it's like you crave it, you build on top of it, your body is in, I don't know, you're in the flow of it.
I will run, I will rise, I will grow, like the world's never known.
All right, welcome back to another Evolution of One. Today, I'm talking with Amy Webb, who is a creative, an author, influencer, blogger. She's just all around creative person. And we've been friends for a number of years, long before I started my work and my art. Amy has published 2 books. She just recently came out with her second children's book. And so I was excited to be able to sit down and talk with her. Broke this into 2 parts. So the first part is really about her journey and her path in finding her creative center and the background prior to the book. So everything leading up to her becoming a recognized children's author and publishing now her second children's book. So I hope you enjoy, and here is my conversation with Amy.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks for taking the time, and sorry for the confusion.
No worries.
Really appreciate it. And yeah, so just wanted to start off, maybe before we get into everything, maybe just a short recap on like who you are and what you do right now.
Okay. So my name is Amy Webb, and right now, I guess the most prominent thing I do is a children's book author. I have 2 children's books. The first one is called When Charley Met Emma, that came out in March of 2019. And my second book just came out this past September, and it's called Awesome Emma. And they both center around, they feature a child with limb differences as the main character. I guess I technically still blog. I really haven't been doing it nearly as consistently as I used to do, but I still do write. The current COVID, kids home half the time situation is obviously, I think, messed with all of our work schedules and those kind of things. And then I do a lot of just, I guess even on Instagram now, I guess I do some influencing there. So So I would say that I do a lot of, most of those things. My background, I studied art. I studied fine art, painting, and that's what my degree is in. So I still do art, not nearly as much. I do kind of have these ideals in my head of like throwing all my electronic devices like in the toilet and then like just quietly just like living out my days, like making art and not showing anyone and just like being my own little, world, I guess, of just making and creating.
So one of the things that's interesting that you did not mention, but I was super impressed with, was you did all the design and stuff for your house, right?
Oh yeah. So we built.
That was really cool. You showed a lot of the process. And this is what I really like about you, is you do a lot of like you do show a lot of real life, but then you also just show like the process of being an artist, of being a creative. And I really appreciate that, because there's a lot that goes in than just the finished product. So, but your work is, from that extent, is super beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really, so, since people don't know, I guess an extension of like this telling about myself is that we are a special needs family. So we have, I've been married to my husband for almost 15 years. Was it 50? It's like hard to remember because again, it was like a COVID anniversary. It was like, was it? I think it was 50. And we have 3 daughters, and our middle daughter is disabled and she's a wheelchair user. And so for us, building a house that is accessible was a huge undertaking, but it was also, anyway, it's been amazing. So yeah, we live in a house that we absolutely love. It was such a big process. I had no idea the emotional toll that it would be. I really did. I mean, because we were renovating, but technically our contractors will say that they considered it a new build with as extensive as it was. And so, yeah, it was a really big project, and it was something that we had to take just like a little bit at a time. So, but yeah. So I love interior design. I love that. I just have never considered myself, I don't know. I have some like seriously embarrassing like home project of yesteryear, that. So I've really done some ugly stuff in the past, but I feel like I've gotten to a place where I feel comfortable.
I think that's one of the things. So we've been friends for a while. And one of the things that I really liked about you and, your husband too, is just really creative, like really, you do multiple things. And I think a lot of times people have the idea, and this is kind of one of the things that I struggle with, is that you have to do like one thing really well, right, and that's like your thing. But I just don't operate that way. And so it's nice to see other people that are, multifaceted like myself, and feel like, no, it's okay. Like there's not one right way to do it. And that the creativity overlaps in a lot of different areas. So I think that's really nice to see.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I'm someone who, I think I would get bored if I was just trying to do one thing all the time. I might be better if I was like, could focus on one thing. I know that it's interesting because one other thing that I love that I don't like talk a lot about, I guess, publicly, like I really love comedy, and I've kind of have this secret dream of like being a stand-up comedian. And Jerry Seinfeld talks about how like, you don't have time. Like if you want to be really good at something, you basically have to focus on one thing. And anyway, and so I'll listen to things like that and be like, yeah, that's probably true. Like he's like, I also really like cars, but if I wasn't into cars, I'd probably be even that much better of a comedian. But like you said, I do appreciate people who do a lot more. And I think that a lot of what, when I look at like writing, for example, and I see the process that I do in painting, they're very similar processes. So I think it's interesting to see how you approach something can be really similar across different disciplines.
Yeah, I want to get into and back up and talk about those formative years and kind of what led you into being an author and getting into writing a book. And actually, I don't know if anyone has seen your art. Your art was beautiful. Like a lot of the work that you've done that I'd seen is really, really, really beautiful work too. And so you are super skilled. But what led you to be able to like get there? Like, were you always creative? Were you always painting? Well, yeah, just like, what was that upbringing like? Was it were you always that way? Or when did you like start identifying some of these patterns?
Yeah, definitely as a kid, I was always drawing. I mean, when I look back at my childhood, there's a lot, I could say about like, my parents divorced really young, and we spent some time with our grandparents. We lived with them for a while when we were little. I had step parents. There was a lot of like family issues that are present. But when I think about me and my interests, I spent a lot of time just hunkered down somewhere drawing. And my mom even talks about, when I was really little, like 3 years old or something, that she just eventually, she ended up like just lining my room in butcher paper up to like as high as I could reach. She was just like so tired of like cleaning off like the walls and stuff. So I and as a kid, just in my grandparents' house, like just any pad of paper could just be like, Amy, because they just like flip through it and be like, every page is drawn on. And so that was always something I loved. And when I was young, I really was obsessed with animation specifically, and I really wanted to be a Disney animator. I would say that was like, from the age of like, I don't know, elementary school through maybe even a lot of high school. So I would draw.
What caught that? What instigated that?
I have no idea. I think I just loved, I mean, to this day, I still love films and movies and storytelling. So maybe there's that, but it's interesting to see even this process of art because of what I do now versus like what I used to do, because as a kid, it was very much that thrill of being able to capture something and make it look like the thing you were trying to make it look like,
Yeah.
And so in 8th grade, I was the kid who could draw a really good Little Mermaid. I can still bust out a Little Mermaid and a Sebastian, the characters from, the crowd from Little Mermaid. And I got really good at just like, being able to draw these cartoon characters and then like life drawing and self-portraits and stuff. And so, and even through college, I really just enjoyed drawing, and just, again, there was that thrill of like, can it look like it this time? And then, it does look like a person or whatever. And I like that. At some point it just changed. I don't, there was something that I don't know what changed about it, but I just, at some point I was like, I just want to paint and draw. Like, I just want to, and cause when I first got to college, I was like, not even sure of like what the programs were. And I saw like graphic design. I remember like looking through a design thing. I was like, well, okay. And then it wasn't until someone said, well, there's, fine art over here. And I was like, oh yeah, I just want to paint and draw, And so I just started doing that. And so, and so for me, I think the challenge has been over the years to the simplification of something, and to really, I don't know, like when I graduated, my paintings were really, these abstracted landscapes. I generally still do a lot of representational stuff. But it was interesting to see like, people's reaction. I mean, sometimes people still really like my stuff and there'd be this positive reaction, but it was interesting too, how sometimes then they'd see something that I drew, like a portrait or maybe just a still life, and they're like, oh, you can draw, and that reaction of like, oh, you are good at art, and so I don't know. So I don't know if I'm making sense, but just I really think when it comes down to it, it's just that itch and desire to create. And but here's the thing for me that has been a obstacle or hurdle, if you will. I'm still so glad that I majored in art, and I love that I, did that major, that I didn't worry about the practical thing. I did what I really loved and wanted to do. But I've also found that studying something and having this like degree put this pressure on me to feel like, okay, you're supposed to know what you're doing. You're supposed to know all these things, and now go work within these rules or whatever that you've learned, and do this and make it good. And so,
did that come before you started getting into it as a degree, or did that come nearing the end? Like, at what point did you start feeling that pressure?
I think during the process of like getting the degree, I think there was one professor in particular who was really influential to me, and I really like him, and I still feel like I learned a lot from him, but I also felt a certain rigidity there about like, I don't know, I just started to feel the pressure of like, you've got to know what you're doing and being very intentional, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but I think it took some of the play out of it for me. I think it just took some of the like, just I'm going to create just to create, and I don't know. And because I've found with writing in particular that I don't often know what I'm getting to, and it's the process that helps me get there. And I think for art, I felt so much pressure to know from the beginning what I was doing, and feeling like the intentionality was there from the beginning, rather than letting the process dictate that and drive it and build upon itself. And like anything, any practice, art is, for me, it's like working out, where if you do it sporadically, it kind of sucks every time a little bit. If you're doing it consistently and you're in that flow and in your groove, it's like you crave it you build on top of it. Your body is in, I don't know, you're in the flow of it. And so that's the hard thing about art, is that I haven't been as consistent with it through having kids, through being a stay-at-home mom. And so the stop and start of it, I still feel like I'm not in a really great flow of art for a long time. And that's where writing came in for me.
Hang on, say that again.
And that's where writing came in for me with motherhood. That's where, because then it was like, my husband and I got married. Brack and I got married in 2005. In August of 2005, we moved to New York City 2 weeks after we got married, because he was doing dental school. And that September, he was like, I started a blog for us. And I was like, a what? I had no idea what it was. This was like 2005. Like, what was a blog?
I never knew he started it. Funny.
Yeah. Because it was like, oh, we can just do this. This is a fun new thing that people are doing to, like, so our friends and family can know what we're doing. That was the only intention of it. It was like, we just our stupid little snippets of, like, the time this pigeon pooped on me in the city, or, like, we're just sharing those stories. And so, but when I had my first daughter, it turned into an outlet, I found like these other, like, these mommy bloggers, and it was in that community at the beginning. I mean, I know blogging, what it is today, it can be this really serious, people make money off of it. People make a really good living off of it. But I'm reminded of, have you ever seen Dogtown and the Z-Boys, that movie?
No.
Okay. So it's a movie about, like, pro skaters. It was a documentary about, like, the early pro skaters, like, what's his name? Stacy Peralta, and, like, all these guys. And there's two different ones. I can't remember which one I'm saying. There's one that's a documentary, and one they kind of, like, made into a movie sort of based on the documentary. So I'm talking about the documentary of, like, the early days of skateboarding. And he talks about how, like, they just chased after this thing that he's like, there was no promise in it. There was no, like, future in skateboarding. We just did it because we loved it. And I look back at, like, those early days of blogging for me, and yeah, there was no one was chasing this as a career. No one was starting a blog in 2005 because they thought they were going to, like, monetize it and make it big. And you were doing it because you loved it. And so that's why, because honestly, I have made very little money off of blogging over the years. I really haven't made that much. It's been really sporadic, but I look back and I can say I did it because I loved it for a good solid 14, years of just doing it because I loved it. And so there was something I feel like that was magical about them, because you just had all these women writing to write. And I can look back at so many of the voices of people that I followed back then, that, again, there wasn't a monetization. There wasn't, I don't know. So anyway, I'm kind of going off there, but for me, it was that the other thing about it was that I didn't care if I was good. I didn't expect myself to be good, because I wasn't a trained writer. I couldn't tell you what syntax is. I couldn't tell you about sentence structure to this day. And so that was the other thing, that it felt very low pressure for me. You know what I mean? I didn't feel the pressure of, I'm supposed to be good at this. I'm supposed to be this amazing writer. I was just sharing my life with other people, mostly just people we knew across the country, connecting with other people we knew. And it really wasn't until, just because I know you're going to put this online. So my middle daughter, her online, we call her Lamp. That's not her real name, but I don't use her real name online. So when Lamp was born, and she was born disabled, well, I found out when I was pregnant with her. And so I was 18 weeks pregnant. We found out that she didn't have most of her left arm. She had a shorter right arm with a hand-like appendage, but it wasn't going to be a typical hand. Her legs were both shorter. She had, she was going to have feet, but we didn't know what that meant in all these ways, everything. So it was that total, flipping our world upside down situation. But that's also when, for me, the blogging and the writing really started to take a turn into something that was therapeutic, something that I was using to process emotions, and something that, even though I journaled all my life, it was, I don't know, there was something different about, one, when you're on the computer, you edit, I could go back and edit, and I do that, and I don't do that in my journal. It's like you're just writing forward. And so there's something to me, and again, this is how it's like very similar to how I paint. is I put stuff on there, I put paint on and I remove it, and I put some back on and then I remove some of it. And so that's a lot of how writing has always been to me too, is this back and forth. And there was something about doing that just like, I don't know, it just really connected with me. I remember the first time I wrote something about her that a lot of people told me it made them cry. And I was like, good. I don't know, I just felt like, good. I did that. I did that to you. So,
Did that surprise you that you had that reaction? Or was that an intention when you were creating it?
Yeah, that one, I can still remember where I was when I wrote this. I can remember what I was thinking. I can remember like the song playing on the background. And it was definitely something that and honestly, even though it was like good, it was like, yeah, of course it made you cry. Like that should have made you cry, And I knew that it was granted, I'm talking about disability and I'm talking about my daughter being disabled and not knowing at the time, she wasn't born yet. And I can also see, 10 years later, a lot of my, internalized ableism and my fears that, I had surrounding disability. So there was a lot of it that I recognize now as not what I feel at all, of course. But at the time, that's part of the process of going through all that. It was something that it was cathartic. It was an incredibly cathartic thing to be able to process what I was going through, even though I also have to say, I look back now and I know that I probably shared too much at times, because that's definitely something that parents of kids with disabilities need to be careful of not oversharing. I don't think I overshared too much private information. That's the thing about my daughter's disability, is that it's very visible to the public. And so, anyway, so that's one thing that's different than maybe other disabilities, but
yeah,
you do have to be mindful of that as a parent.
Yeah. There's a lot of this that I really connect with, because so you were here, or maybe you guys had already left when we had kind of left Mormonism, and I was on my own journey, and that's when I started my magazine. And it was the same thing for me. It was very much like trying to wrestle with things. Grew up in the religion and having to process, to creating a whole new framework, how to navigate the world and learn morality. And so for me, it was it gave birth to a lot of what I do now, and I didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of like what you're saying, it's just like there's things that are in me, and that was like it was just something at that time just like spoke, and as it was coming out, it wasn't for anyone else, and still to this day kind of like isn't. That part like isn't. I put it out, but if it'll help someone, great. But it is very much. I was just read this book, Burnout. And
just started that today on.
Oh my gosh.
That's so funny, because I just listened to Brene Brown did a podcast with them.
That's how I came across it. Yeah.
I just had to finish my last book, and then I just downloaded it on Audible today.
Yeah, I read that, and the Viktor Frankl
Man's Search for Meaning.
Man's Search for Meaning. At the same time, I was like going back between the two. I don't know why I started two books at one time, but the Burnout one, the thing that I really liked that they talked about was finishing your feeling cycle, and like this idea they talked about is like, even like she talked about graduating, and it's like it's done, it should be over, but all of the feelings were still there, and there was still things that needed to come down, and there was this moment she talked about ways to finish the cycle. And when she said that, I knew like that's my art, everything that I do. That's what it is for me. It's this way for me to with all the other things going on, it's therapeutic, right? Like you were saying, like it helps me to be able to handle all the other things that are going on in my life. And if I don't have that, just like if I don't exercise, my days off, it's kind of the same time, like creating helped me get through the really hard times. And it's almost like it's me exposing myself to myself, if that makes sense. Like
Totally.
it's learning about like who I am and getting back to, not like the basics of what, really understanding like, why do I think this way, or like, why am I pushed there? Why did that happen? So
Yeah.
I definitely connect with a lot of what you're saying.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about that, because the writing would help me, and it still does help me. Although I will say this is where social media, particularly Instagram, has messed with that process for me, and I've noticed it because I have a much harder time sitting down and just like getting things out all at once. And then on top of it, with the pandemic, I've sort of allowed nervous behaviors just to be okay right now. And Instagram is a nervous behavior for me, right? It's like this constant checking. It's just a soothing thing. And I've tried not to be too harsh on myself about that. But before, and the other thing is that now sometimes Instagram is my mini blog post, and there are thoughts. And so, there are things that take me an hour and a half, an Instagram post that takes me an hour and a half to write out and put together. So there are those little things, but the thing with writing some of the long form essays I've done over the years, it was very much this, like, I had all these things out there and I didn't know how they connected until I could like write them. And then it was just like, it's amazing to uncover these connections, or to realize how you think about something that I feel like I could only get there through writing. I could only do that, to sit down and think about it. But the other part of creating for me too is I used to do these things with my husband. So again, my youngest kid now is 6. And so they have school. I'm not, obviously with the pandemic, things are a little different. We're in hybrid. So they're not at school 5 days a week. But I'm not full-time home with like young children. I'm not like napping and doing that whole thing, right? They're a lot more self-sufficient. So we're in a different phase of life. But when we lived in Texas and we still had that, there was something we would do every once in a while called an artathon. And that's when I would like take 24 hours, and he knew that he had the kids for 24 hours. And it usually would start, I feel like I would usually start the evening or the afternoon of the day before. And I would sleep. So it's not like I didn't sleep, but I would start in the evening, and then I had the whole next day, 24 hours. And I would give myself these parameters. It would be to make art. It would be to paint. So I'd say like, okay, I'm gonna do 3 paintings. This is my theme. This is what I'm doing. And I would just go. And it was interesting because I would feel this restlessness and this caginess before, like, and in my life before that. And I would just feel like I can't focus. I couldn't be a good mom. I couldn't write very well. And I'd be like, Bracken, I need to do an artathon. I've just got to get some stuff out. And it wasn't even like I had these ideas necessarily. It was again, just that need to be able to like, there's always been something magical to me about putting paint on a canvas and just watching it. Like, I don't know, like even painting a room, I don't hate, I don't know. Even as a kid, I would ask my grandma if I could just wash the walls. I love like watching marks being removed. You know what I mean? There was something about just like this broad canvas. I loved like either watching things be removed or putting things on. So that process, just that feels really soothing to me. And so, but it was just, I would do this artathons, I would paint something, and I would just immediately be like this release. And I would stop feeling like this cagey tiger, and I could just like, and I could be a mom again, and I could focus on my kids. And so I know that feeling of like, you need to do something, and I think especially for me during those years, it was like, because so much of your life and your time is not yours anymore. So it was like, I just need something that's mine.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. Is that where the book idea came out of then? It came out of, you started writing with the blog, and or is it something that you always had in the back of your mind?
No. So here's the annoying thing about this is like, I never thought of writing a children's book ever in my life, never had any desire to do it until like the moment I had the idea. And when I say like, I know that's so annoying, is because I know there's people who like, this is such a big dream of theirs, and they're like, F you. Like, you just did it and you don't even seem to care or whatever. But I feel the same way because I know other people who are painters or artists who are like, oh, I never thought of doing it, and now it's like my full-time career. Like, and sometimes there's this like screw you about it. Like you don't know if you can relate to
There's
that.
a frustration. Yeah.
Yeah. But so the blogging, one of the big things that I did on my blog for, I want to say 8 years, very consistently, was I did this thing called the Special Needs Spotlight. And then I changed the name to the Disabilities and Differences Spotlight. And so this is when, realizing how important it had been for me to share about our life, share about our daughter, her differences, kind of what we were going through. I was like, I bet if I open up my platform to other parents, they would love to share, this very unique side of parenting that the majority of people don't go through, whatever it is. And so I started interviewing other families on there. And then I started interviewing other disabled adults. And that is when I just feel like this understanding of disability, this passion for disability and advocacy really started to grow as I was and it really was just like one of the, I don't know, it was this little idea, you know what I mean? It was this little idea. And I told Bracken about it one time. I was like, I think I'm going to start interviewing other people. And because other people who had blogs had like little series or things I did. I was like, I think this would be a great series. I could do it weekly. And he's like, weekly? And I was like, yeah, and he's kind of like, see how long this lasts. And it wasn't necessarily every week, because it was hard to do that every week, but still pretty consistently.
Had you done something like that before? Sorry to interrupt, but had there been other like series that you had done? So this is the first kind of like, oh, maybe I could
maybe
do
like
these
like I think I'd done like, maybe some other like a small like love where you live and showing different places of where we'd lived and like places we'd gone, but nothing this consistent. No, I mean, in the end, I did like 240 interviews to date.
Wow.
And it was really a labor of love, and this was like, I wasn't doing there was no Patreon. So it wasn't like I was asking, I wasn't getting donations. I mean, I definitely had more blog traffic, but still I had very limited advertising. And, after the first 100, I was like, maybe I should call it quits. Like, maybe I should be done with this. And then like, every time I would think about quitting, I would get, like an email, or I would just get this like feeling, just keep going. Like, this is important. And had some really cool experiences come out of doing that series. I mean, like, one was just that there was one woman who I interviewed who their daughter, she didn't have a diagnosis, but I featured them. And then like a number of months later, maybe even a year later, I don't know, she wrote me back and she was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, basically some therapist had read their interview on there and said, I think your daughter might have this diagnosis. Like, I've worked with kids like this. And she was like, anyway, we ended up getting confirmation. We finally found her diagnosis. Like, thank you so much. And it wasn't like I found it, but just that was like a bridge to that. And I had a couple instances like that where people were able to find a diagnosis for their kid because they'd read something.
Wow. That's powerful.
It was, and or just like knowing, like, I had a friend who was a teacher in New York City, and she was using my Special Needs Spotlight in her class to teach her kids about it, and another friend who was a teacher was also using it. So to see it was being used as an educational tool, but really, I mean, I look back and I think it was. I might have been the person most affected of all, because like I read every single one of them. I did, multiple times, because I had to edit them and put them together every week. And it was just like, it was honestly just such an honor, for people to open up. And especially when I started to interview firsthand accounts of people who are disabled, then I started to realize there was a big difference, between what we were going through as parents, which is a valid thing to discuss. I mean, it is a big change, and there are different levels of caregiving, but also then to realize like, oh my gosh, we need to be listening to the voices of people who are disabled themselves, and centering these voices and hearing their stories. And as parents, it's really, when you don't share an identity with your kid, it's really important that you do listen to other people who share that identity, to learn, And so I just felt like I was just learning so much. It was just, it was just an incredible thing to do. And honestly, when I feel like the dust settles a little bit from the pandemic and maybe I get back into a rhythm of something like that I would love to bring it back on maybe a more like manageable, maybe like once a month or twice a month type of thing. Because there's so many people that now I've connected with through Instagram that I would love to feature. But anyway, it was I was learning so much, and I was writing a lot just about, again, other experiences. And so there was this one blog post that I started to write kind of like the beginning of every school year. And it was, how to like navigate an interaction, like how to navigate a special needs situation is what I can't remember the exact title. But basically, with the time that we lived in Texas, that's when Lamp was like 1 to 4 years old. And those were the years, those were like, I feel like those were just some of the big years because she wasn't in school yet. So we were, she was home with me all the time. And when you have a child that age, you're going to play dates, you're going to the story time, you're doing these things, right? Like all the time you're out and about. And I had an older kid, I had done that, and doing this now with her, they were very different experiences. I mean, we didn't just go to the playground and she didn't just start to play with kids. It's like we had to explain her body first to potential playmates. And parents didn't know how to react and kids didn't know how to react. And so that was just something, I guess, when you think about all the things of becoming a special needs parent, I just wasn't prepared for the amount of education that I was going to be giving to other children on a very constant basis, especially during those years when you are going to those places a lot. It's different now that she's in school. We live in a small district on purpose so that she, like, all the kids basically in our community know who she is, but when we go places outside of that bubble, things can be really different. But I think it was interesting. It's just interesting. I think it's even heightened at that age because the older she gets, the peers that are interacting with her are also going to be a little bit older and clued in. But at that age, her peers are at that very inquisitive. They don't know about disability, right?
They don't really know how to even communicate, and it's
right. And for her, especially for her kind of disability, like I said, she doesn't have most of her left arm and her arm stops right there. So kids don't even know that's possible. I mean, like, the kids that just like, wait, what, you're dealing with kids who are just like so reactionary, and in a very pure, innocent way, but could still be hurtful sometimes, could still do this. So I was just, again, this was something that we just had to deal with like dozens and dozens of times. And I would write blog posts about, and even when we moved back to Cincinnati, we continued to have these experiences when we first moved back here, because again, when she started to go to school on a consistent basis, it just was a different dynamic. Things, changed a little bit. It still depends on where we go in public, but again, not having that same, that particular, peer age is a little bit different. But we still do get the stares. She just still does get the questions and things like that, but it's not as intense. But at that age, there were times, multiple times that she would have an entire playground surround her and ask questions. And we would literally be having to like break kids up and like, go play, leave her alone. There were times that we had like an entire like Chick-fil-A playground, so I have these visceral memories that she doesn't even really have of what that was like. And I was navigating those things at that age for her. She wasn't navigating that. And so, anyway, it was this interesting thing. And so, I was interviewing other families. I would always ask, like, how do you want people to interact with them? What, if you could tell people what to do, that was a consistent question I had. And the answer was pretty universal. And like, we just rather you ask, if you have questions, just ask.
And you started this, was that like near the beginning of the interviews? And so the majority of, at what point did you start kind of inquiring on that to other people that you were interviewing?
That was a question from the very beginning of the interviews.
Oh, okay.
So all interviews
That's interesting.
have that question. But I didn't start really writing, so then I started to write this, like, how to navigate the situation with other people, because you have to understand, like, for years, I didn't have any sort of like guide. I didn't know what to do. So I was just stumbling through that situation every single time. And then eventually I kind of developed my own little like way to interact with kids. And I kind of like, I had a system. So basically I was just sharing that system with other parents. Right. And so I kept thinking, how can I get this out on a bigger level? How could I share this? Because when I would do this blog post, it would get picked up a lot of places, a lot of bigger platforms would feature it, but then it would kind of die down. And so at one point I was at a blogging conference that I go to every year, and the idea really came to me very suddenly. I don't know if you've read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic.
I haven't, no.
Oh, you need to read that book. Like, as a creative, you need to read that book. And
Okay.
she talks about ideas. It's all about like creative process. And it's really interesting because she talks about ideas as just like, you're not the creative genius. You just need to show up, and like the ideas can pick you. They're out there in the universe. And if the idea comes to you and you don't do anything with it, it's going to go find someone else, you know? And
Yeah.
I very much had that kind of like, where I just felt like the idea landed on me because it was just like so sudden. It was so like, oh my gosh, that's what I can do. I can write a book, a children's book about this. And I had exactly zero experience. I had zero know-how about the publishing industry, but it was definitely one of those, like, I really felt like the universe was like tapping me on the shoulder, you know?
So, but before you move on, I think this is one of the books that has really helped me, that I like to recommend to other creatives, is the War of Art. And he talks about a similar thing, and he talks about the connection between the time bound interacting with the timeless. And so he's saying, like, you know, there could have been centuries where that, you know, da 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 was whispered in other people's ears, but it was Beethoven that was like, he caught it and it connected. And it's this idea that exactly what you're saying is that there is an interaction between you know, the physical and the non-physical, and there's a sense that's happening, and a connection of, and that's what that kind of creative process is that it can connect to you in a specific way, and you become, you know, a conduit that births something through you,
right?
And you are kind of witnessing it at the same time, and so I mean, I've had a lot of those things myself, so I totally connect with that. So you had this, it stuck. You didn't have any background in it, but then go from there.
The good thing was, so I'd been going to this conference. I've told you guys about this conference. I go to, it's called Alt Summit. I've been to this conference for a number of years, and the good thing about this conference is that I knew that this conference was filled with women who had done stuff that they had no idea how to do it. Do you know what I mean? And so that was very helpful for me already, because I will say, you know, going back to like childhood and all these things, I think one of the things that I lacked the most in all my formative years was the belief in my ideas. I think that I wasn't always someone who believed that my ideas were good or good enough, I guess I would say, or worthy of like being, I don't know, taken seriously. And so I think part of it too is I look back and think, you know, I'd spent some time thinking, how could I get this idea out on this bigger level? And like, and like, I feel like when the idea hit me, it was like, almost like the universe didn't even want to like put this in my brain a moment before I was actually ready to do it, and to believe that I could do it, and to like tackle it, if that makes sense. Because I think that had it come earlier, I might've been like, that's silly, I can't do that. Or because go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, because I really do remember feeling like I have a choice here. I can pursue this, or I cannot pursue this. I've had other ideas and I've not pursued them. I knew that I just remember feeling like, because I feel like even I read Big Magic after this, and sort of while I worked on the book, and it kind of like, okay, yeah, keep going in this. Because a children's, you know, traditional publishing is a slow process. And so I started writing the book in 2016. Maybe it was I think it was early 2016, and it didn't get published to 2019. You know, I mean, it's a children's book. It's not that long. It's 32 pages or less. And so, you know, it's 750 words, but the process is very long. I mean, I think I got the contract signed in 2017. You know what I mean? It's just such a long process. And so, I don't know, I'm trying to say, I guess, but I just remember reading her book during then. And I felt very much like, I feel like this is going to happen, but I also feel like I hoped it would be quick because I really did feel that like the universe wants me to do this, because even immediately after having the idea, like the rest of my experience at that conference, I met my illustrator at the conference like 2 days later and had this like, she recognized me from BYU Hawaii. Apparently we'd gone, and like, I didn't know it. I mean, it just had all these like, and it was like, she recognized me and she was like, wait a second, is your name Amy? Did you live in Hawaii 20 years ago? I was like, wait, we know each other. And I knew who she was, and I knew her work. And it was sort of like, oh my gosh, she's who you need to illustrate your book. Even though I didn't know at the time, you don't get to choose your illustrator. Like as an author, the publisher chooses your illustrator. But I got very lucky in that, like when I talked to the publisher, I was like, I really have this vision for this book. I really want it to be beautiful. There's someone I'd love you guys to consider. And so it worked out, like, but it was like all these miraculous little things that I felt like very, anyway.
How long, this had to have happened close to when you were going to this. It seems like what's the timeline of when you had the idea versus being at the conference and starting to make these connections?
I had the idea at the conference.
Oh, okay. At the conference.
I was at the conference. And even then I still remember I've had an idea to write a book, like a memoir type of book for a while, even like a fictionalized memoir, kind of making it funny, but just from my perspective. So the idea of writing the book wasn't foreign to me, but it was a children's book I had not thought about at all. And I was talking to some people, telling them what I do. And this woman says, you should write a book. And I said, yeah, I really want to. And she goes, no, I mean a children's book. And I really feel like, again, that was like, and that's when, so even though it was like, she said it was like the idea, because I really felt like the universe was like, she's not getting it. You got to say children's book, you have to be specific. And she was like, no, children's book. And then it was like, I don't know if you've ever had that idea. It's like where someone says something or something happens, and then you also have this feeling of like, just this extra, you know what I mean? Of like, and it was just like, and it was just that. So even though someone else said it to me, it was very much feeling like that idea. And that's how I feel like I have received a lot of ideas or promptings, whatever you call my life, is through other people. So that wasn't a foreign concept to me, that someone would say it to me to help me realize this is what I should do. And then just things during the rest of that conference kind of kept coming together. But again,
did you have moments like in the conference when things were spoken? Was it like it's deepening this connection? Because it was so fresh, it was like you had this spark, and then you meet these people, you're listening to a talk, and it's like, oh, that goes real back to this idea that I had. Is it? Because I feel like the momentum is oxygen for new ideas, and if it's just a fleeting moment, and then kids get busy, and then it could come and go. But you had this time that you were going there specifically to have creative mindset.
Yeah.
And how much did that play into it, right?
I think a ton, because, that idea of momentum, it's, so I think that the biggest things were the idea, the woman saying that to me, me really feeling this like force of that hitting me. Then I think it was 2 days later, which was the end of the conference, which is when I met Marilee Lydiard, who was the illustrator. And it was like meeting her, and I'd already started talking to people like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write a children's book. I knew what I'm going to do next. Like this was my thing. Cause going back to like this influencers and all these different things I do, like I know so many influencers like had a product line and done this, and people be like, you've got this great platform. What are you going to do with it? Like, you're going to start a business, you're going to start this. And I kept just like, I don't know. And nothing felt like that connection until that moment. And that's when I think that's the other thing too, is like, sometimes you feel this pressure to like, hustle and go out and do it. But I was just like, anything that I do right now, like, I don't really feel like it's what I want to do. So part of it was like, this is the thing, this is the thing you need to do. And this is, and just kind of feeling that. But then, yes, I met Marilee and just thought, oh my gosh, exactly. She is who I need to illustrate this. And then even the very end of the conference, the other kind of significant thing, and again, this goes back to momentum, was that there was I was leaving the conference. I was in the airport. And I still remember kind of like calling on like the universe, like, listen, if there's anything else, like any other, even as I'm leaving, like just help me out, throw me a bone. And I ended up in the security line right behind this woman that I recognized from the conference, who was like one of the keynote speakers, like this kind of big deal that like I would not have ever talked to before, because I felt like I had no business. I mean, she was a successful business person, had like all these big, you know, collaborations like Anthropology and Target. But I was like, oh, I am here for it. Like I'm behind her in the security line for the next half an hour. We are doing this. And I started talking to her, and she just had the energy of like, this is so awesome. And she was like, what do you want to do? Do you want to do a product line? What's your thing? And I told her, I was like, I want to write a children's book. She's like, oh, that's amazing. You know, she listened to my story, and she's like, I'm going to send you all my contacts in publishing. And
wow.
And she did. And I mean, it was just, and so it was the things like that, Mark. It was very much the momentum. Now, here's the thing. None of those contacts panned out to be the contact, right? None of those, but it was that momentum. It was very much feeling like the universe was like saying, yes, continue, go with this. And so,
yeah,
I mean, it was amazing. And she, you know, and we'd seen each other since those conferences, and I've, you know, it's crazy to like give her my book a couple of years later and sign it to her. And we were just like, that happened, so cool. You know? I mean, it was really cool. And she's introduced me to other people, and I do think momentum was a big part of it.
That reminds me of another book that I really love. I think you've read it. The Alchemist. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've seen you talk about it. But in The Alchemist, one of the things they talk about is that when the universe, like beginner's luck, is the universe, you know, trying to help you. And so it's this, you know, this story, and each moment that he recognizes, you know, the universe kind of reaching out, then he knows that the luck is on his side to keep you moving, right? To keep that momentum. And there's this moment that I always think about when he's, you know, is able to get the job at selling the crystals. And then that's going well. And he's like, he recognizes it. And so he's like, hey, we should start selling tea. And the owner is like, that's ridiculous. And it all goes back. He ends up doing it and like getting on his, you know, personal legend in his journey. And that was like the connection that I made with the story you were saying, is you already had these things, and you're like, in any other situation, you know, it wouldn't have been the right thing, but you were just like, the universe, like it all lined up for you to just keep that moving forward. And that's powerful. And you have to listen to those things.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and it really was, and that, you know, and then there's the actual process of like writing the book. It's almost ridiculous that I guess I get as much credit as I do, because it's like, I had an editor, I had the woman who, because then the way I actually found my publishers was because I wrote a blog post talking about the need for representation. Again, feeling, and like, I just wrote this blog post just kind of talking about how the lack of representation in the world really affects us on a personal level, because kids don't know anything about disability. That affects how my daughter can move through the world or not move through the world, because she gets stopped, she gets stared at, she gets pointed, you know, like she can't just like go places. We have to like educate people, right? And so again, I was writing this blog post, and I finished it, and again felt that little like universal, because I wanted to publish a book and not tell anyone until it was done, right? I just wanted to be like, look what I did. And I remember the universe was sort of like, you need to put it out there. You need to tell people that you want to publish a book. If you want to make this happen, you need to put it out there. So I opened this blog post back up, and I said, okay, you know, and it was sort of like, oh gosh, I don't want to be the girl who says she's trying to publish a book and it never happens. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it was hard to put myself out there in that way, because I opened the blog post back up and I said, you know, in fact, I'm trying to add to this representation, and I've written a children's book and I'd like to get it published, because, you know, and so I talk about that. And a woman in publishing who you know, you don't know who reads your stuff. You don't know where it ends up. Followed me. She reached out and she said, hey, I saw this, and and then, you know, and that's the thing too. It's like, she's following on her intuition in the universe, because she's told me later, we met actually at a book conference a couple of years ago, and we talked about the whole thing. She's like, I read your blog post and I stood up and I was like, Andrew, like, I need to reach out to her. Like, I think we've got something here. And Andrew was the guy who ended up being my editor, you know?
Wow.
And so I think, you know, she followed through on her end of the deal, but all this to say that, like, you know, when you finish a product like this, it's like, so many people had their hand in making something like this happen.
All right, so that's the close of part 1, and look forward to seeing you in part 2. Thanks for sticking around.